A waitress risked everything to seat two muddy strangers, only to discover they were Chuck Norris and Keanu Reeves. What happened next inside that luxury restaurant would leave blood on the floor, reputation shattered, and a truth no one saw coming. But the real question island: why were they there in the first place? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The wheels of the battered pickup rumbled over the cobblestones as it came to a slow stop in front of the restaurant. Its faded blue paint was splattered with dry dirt, and the rear bumper bore a sticker that read, "Be kind anyway." The engine coughed once before settling into silence. Chuck Norris pushed open the passenger door, his boots hitting the pavement with a dull thud, mud clinging to the soles. Keanu Reeves stepped out on the driver's side, stretching his back and rolling his shoulders as he glanced up at the towering facade of the steakhouse. The name of the restaurant shimmered in gold above the doors, Estelle and Rowe. Everything about the place screamed exclusivity, from the polished marble steps to the manicured hedges lining the entrance. A valet in a perfectly pressed suit glanced their way and immediately looked back down at his clipboard, pretending not to see them. Chuck dusted his jeans, which were caked at the knees. "You ever feel underdressed for a steak?" he muttered with a faint grin. Keanu laughed softly. "You've got spaghetti sauce on your elbow and engine grease on your collar. I think the steak's more worried about you than the other way around." Chuck glanced at his arm. "That wasn't spaghetti. That was chili. The guy at the shelter dumped the whole thing on me by accident." "Still smells like cumin," Keanu teased. The two men looked like they'd spent the day wrestling with the earth, and they had. They'd been up since dawn, hauling boxes at a food pantry in the industrial district, handing out warm meals at a pop-up kitchen, and fixing up bikes for kids in a housing project. Somewhere in between, they'd helped an elderly veteran patch his leaking roof with borrowed tools and stubborn grit. Their clothes wore every mark of it. Keanu still had a pair of work gloves sticking out of his back pocket. His t-shirt was soaked through the back, stained with sweat, and his hair clung damply to his forehead. Chuck's flannel shirt was rolled up at the sleeves, revealing arms lined with cuts and calluses, and both of them had mud up to mid-calf. Still, their faces were calm, worn, but peaceful. Keanu gave a small shrug. "You think they'll let us in?" Chuck looked up at the elegant glass doors and the flicker of candlelight behind them. "Only one way to find out." They walked side by side, boots thudding across the polished sidewalk, leaving faint prints in their wake. Keanu reached for the door handle and pulled it open with quiet resolve. Inside, the restaurant glowed with soft amber light. White linen tables stretched across the floor like a field of silk. A grand chandelier hung from the vaulted ceiling, refracting gold flecks across the marble tile. A live pianist played in the corner, notes gentle and haunting. And standing at the host stand near the entrance was a woman in a sleek black dress with a clipboard and a look that could cut glass. The hostess didn't look up at first. She was busy scribbling something onto the reservation list, her manicured nails clicking rhythmically against the clipboard. Her posture was precise, rigid, like she'd been trained to maintain elegance at all costs. Then she caught a whiff of the two men standing before her: sweat, dirt, gasoline, a hint of chili, and her head finally rose. The smile she wore was mechanical, but it froze the second she saw them. Her eyes traveled from their worn boots to their mud-streaked jeans. She lingered on Chuck's torn flannel and the crusted smear across Keanu's shoulder. Her lips parted slightly, then tightened into a perfect, practiced line. "May I help you?" she asked, voice clipped, forced through gritted teeth. Keanu offered a gentle nod. "We were hoping to get a table. Nothing fancy, just a quiet corner if possible." The hostess didn't move. Her expression didn't shift. It simply hardened, like marble cooling under pressure. "I'm afraid we're fully booked this evening," she said. Chuck tilted his head slightly. "I didn't see anything about reservations, only on the website." She gave a small, icy laugh. "It's implied. We cater to a specific clientele. You might be more comfortable at one of the more casual establishments nearby." Keanu's face remained calm, but his voice carried a subtle tension. "We're just looking for dinner. We've been working all day at the shelter downtown." The hostess raised a brow. And I'm sure the diner on 4th would love to have you. Chuck stepped forward, not threatening, but steady. Look, ma'am, we're not here to cause trouble. We're just two tired men looking for a meal. She glanced toward the bar, then back at them, her eyes narrowing. I can't seat you looking like that. We have a dress code. Collared shirts, clean shoes, no visible grime. Keanu looked down at his boots, then back up. We're clean where it counts. The hostess didn't flinch. Be that as it may, you're making my guests uncomfortable. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Behind them, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. The doors opened, and a well-dressed couple stepped out, he in a tailored suit, she in heels that clicked like applause across the tile. Oh, Mr. Brighton, the hostess beamed, voice changing instantly. Right this way. We have your usual table prepared. She stepped out from behind the rog, stand, practically glowing now, as she led the couple toward the center of the dining room. Chuck watched them go, then turned back to the hostess. I thought you said you were full, he said. Without looking back, she replied coldly over her shoulder. We are, for people like you. And then, as if that settled everything, she walked away, heels tapping rhythmically like punctuation marks on a sentence no one had the right to challenge. Keanu and Chuck stood in place, the soft music and clinking silverware filling the silence between them. Chuck let out a slow breath through his nose. His hands stayed at his sides, calm, but his knuckles had gone pale from the restraint. Keanu glanced around the room. No one had come to help. No one even seemed surprised. A few guests had turned their heads just long enough to scoff before going back to sipping their wine or swirling their soup with silver spoons. One man chuckled quietly. Another whispered something to his wife, who responded with a glance toward the door. Chuck leaned in, voice low but steady. You ever get the feeling folks here don't see people? Just price tags? Keanu didn't answer. He didn't need to. The way his eyes followed the hostess as she flitted from table to table like a queen bee told Chuck everything. Chuck looked toward the exit. We should go. But just before they turned to leave, a voice broke through the hum of jazz and murmured conversation. It was soft, but firm, carrying just enough strength to cut through the noise. They don't have to leave. Chuck turned. Standing nearby was a young woman in a worn black apron. Her brown hair was pulled up in a messy bun, and there was a faint line of flour dust smudged across her cheek. She couldn't have been older than 25, but her eyes held the tired weight of someone who'd been working for decades. She took a cautious step forward. If they're hungry, I can find them a table. The hostess whipped around, like she'd been slapped. Ellie, go back to the kitchen. Now. Ellie didn't flinch. She looked at Chuck, then at Keanu, and gave a nod. Follow me. They exchanged a glance. Then, wordlessly, they followed her. Ellie led them past elegant tables and leather chairs, past guests who looked at them as if they were something that had blown in from a construction site. Some sneered. Others just looked away. The pianist kept playing. Finally, she brought them to a small table near the swinging kitchen doors. The wallpaper was peeling slightly, and the chair wobbled when Keanu tested it. But the table was clean. The utensils were wrapped in a crisp linen napkin, and for the first time in an hour, no one was trying to push them out the door. I'm sorry it's not better, Ellie said, voice quiet. But it's the best I could do without causing more trouble. Chuck gave her a gentle smile. This is the first kindness we've seen all night. She gave a quick nod and turned to fetch menus, but the moment was short-lived. From across the room came the sound of rapid footsteps, heavy, angry, approaching fast. Chuck and Keanu turned their heads just as the restaurant manager appeared, red-faced and fuming, his gaze locked on Ellie like a predator spotting its prey. What the hell do you think you're doing? He shouted. And just like that, the quiet dignity of that moment shattered. Chuck took one step back from the manager's line of fire, planting his boots with care. The man's voice echoed through the room like a slammed door. His presence was loud, sweaty, and sharp around the edges. He wore a blazer too tight for his frame, and a name tag pinned just above a silk pocket square that didn't quite match the suit. His tone wasn't just angry, it was offended. like someone had defiled his kingdom. "I asked you a question," the manager snapped. "Are you out of your mind bringing them in here?" Ellie didn't back down. Her hands were steady, clasped in front of her apron. "They weren't doing anything wrong," she said. "They were just trying to get something to eat. They look like they crawled in off the street." He barked. "You think I'm letting that sit here while paying customers walk past and gag?" Chuck's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Keanu shifted slightly, just enough to put himself between the manager and Ellie. "Back of the house. Now," the man growled. "You're lucky I don't fire you on the spot." Ellie glanced at Chuck and Keanu, hesitated, then turned and disappeared through the kitchen doors without a word. The manager sneered at the two men, eyes moving over them like they were furniture someone forgot to throw out. "You think this is some church basement potluck?" he spat. "This is Estelle and Roe. We serve people with standards." Keanu's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "She was just being decent." "Decent?" the manager repeated, voice rising. "You people don't get decent. You get escorted out." Then he leaned in, lowering his voice, but not his contempt. "You want a handout? Try the corner of 5th and Holloway. The soup kitchen opens at 6. Keanu looked him in the eye. "We didn't ask for a handout." The manager grunted and waved his hand like he was swatting away smoke. "Get out." Before either man could reply, the glass doors behind them swung open with a soft chime. A couple walked in, dripping with money. The man wore a dark tailored jacket and Italian loafers. His watch gleamed under the chandelier. The woman beside him was tall, elegant, diamonds dancing under her collarbone. The manager's entire body language changed. "Mr. and Mrs. Wentworth," he beamed. "So glad you could make it." He practically ran to them, arms open, voice suddenly warm, smooth. "Your booth is ready, just as you requested." The contrast was jarring. Chuck turned back toward the doors, his face unreadable. Keanu's hands were in his pockets, but one thumb tapped against his jeans in a quiet rhythm. As the couple was led past them with wide smiles and fawning compliments, the manager looked back at the two men and smirked. "See," he said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "That's what class looks like." Chuck didn't move right away. He stood still in the center of the tiled lobby, boots leaving faint prints on the polished floor. His hands relaxed at his sides, but his eyes had sharpened. Not angry, just deeply disappointed. Keanu looked around. Diners were watching, though pretending not to. A woman at the nearest table shifted in her seat, lifting her glass slowly, as if hiding behind the rim. A young man by the window took a photo of his meal, but angled the camera just enough to include Chuck in the background. No one said anything, but everyone saw. "We don't belong here," Chuck muttered under his breath. Keanu's eyes stayed locked on the path the hostess had taken. "We don't have to belong. We just wanted a meal." Chuck gave a small shake of his head. "They don't see people, just uniforms and wallets." Then the kitchen doors swung open again. Ellie reappeared, breath slightly shallow, cheeks flushed. She didn't say anything at first. She just walked quietly to their side, holding two menus close to her chest like they were shields. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "He's not supposed to treat people like that." Chuck gave her a faint smile. "You don't owe us an apology." "I know," she replied, "but someone should say it." She glanced over her shoulder, cautious, then gestured toward the far side of the room. "There's a table near the back. It's not much, but it's clean, and it's yours if you still want it." Keanu looked at Chuck. Chuck nodded once. "Lead the way," Keanu said. Ellie turned and began walking, fast but not rushed, head slightly down. She moved like someone, used to not drawing attention, but in that moment, all eyes followed her. Guests whispered behind half-covered mouths. One waiter leaned against the wall, smirking. A woman in pearls scoffed audibly as they passed, shifting her chair to create distance. Chuck felt it in every step. That quiet burn under the skin. Not shame he hadn't done anything wrong, but the sting of being looked at like you didn't belong, like your presence dirtied the air. The further they walked, the more obvious it became. Every server they passed wore that same look, tight-lipped, skeptical, rehearsed. No one smiled. No one offered water or a greeting. Just eyes. Just silence. At last, Ellie stopped near a half wall that separated the main dining area from the service corridor. The table was tucked between a coat rack and a small drink station. One of the legs was shorter than the others, and the overhead light flickered slightly. She pulled out a chair for Chuck and set the menus down gently. "I'll take care of you," she said. "I don't care what they say. You deserve better." Chuck sat slowly, eyes scanning the room one last time. Keanu pulled in next to him, folding his hands on the table. He looked up at Ellie and said, "Thank you for seeing us." Ellie gave a small, grateful smile, but there was tension in her shoulders. Her hands lingered on the backs of their chairs, like she wanted to say more but knew she couldn't. She looked toward the kitchen again, then back at them. "I'll grab you some water," she said, her voice soft. "Let me know if you need anything else." As she turned away, Chuck leaned forward, elbows resting gently on the edge of the table. "She's got guts," he said. Keanu nodded, the only one here who does. Across the restaurant, a murmur of laughter rose from one of the corner booths. A waiter passed by their table without making eye contact, carrying a tray of cocktails balanced expertly in one hand. A couple at a nearby. The table glanced over, and the woman wrinkled her nose as if the air had changed. Chuck watched them for a moment, then turned his eyes to the table. The silverware was spotless. The menus were laminated and clean. Ellie had taken the time to fold their napkins properly, even if the table itself was chipped along one edge. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Keanu picked up the menu and glanced at it. $38 for a steak, he said under his breath. "I've seen shelters feed 50 people with that." Chuck let out a low chuckle. "That steak better change your life." Keanu closed the menu and set it down. "Not the food we came for anyway." From behind the swinging kitchen doors, Ellie reappeared, carrying 2 glasses of ice water with lemon slices floating on top. She placed them down carefully, avoiding the wobble in the table's leg. "I'll give you a few minutes to look over the menu," she said. "Take your time," Chuck said. "We're in no rush." She hesitated again, then lowered her voice. "He'll probably come back, the manager. Just don't take it personal. He's like that with everyone who doesn't wear a Rolex." Keanu's gaze didn't shift. "You shouldn't have to apologize for him." "I'm not," she said. "I'm just trying to make sure you get at least one peaceful meal tonight." Keanu looked up at her. "And that's more than most would do." Ellie's cheeks flushed slightly. She nodded and turned back toward the kitchen, moving quickly. Chuck sipped from his water. "She's walking a fine line." "She already crossed it," Keanu said. "She sat us." Chuck tilted his glass slightly, watching the ice swirl. "This place runs on fear. People doing what they're told, because they don't want to lose what little they've got." Keanu's voice was calm, but she made a choice. Chuck looked toward the front of the restaurant, where the hostess still stood, laughing with the same couple from earlier. "Yeah," he murmured, "and I got a feeling she's about to pay for it." Just then, heavy footsteps echoed again from the main hallway. The manager was coming back, and this time, he wasn't alone. The first thing they heard was the heavy stomp of polished shoes on tile. The second was the voice. It didn't yell, not at first. It slithered through the air like oil over water. "Ellie." Her name snapped out like a whip crack. Chuck and Keanu looked up in unison as Bradley emerged from the main corridor. His slicked back hair gleamed under the chandelier light, and his face was flushed from either anger or wine, maybe both. His jaw moved tight with every word, and his eyes were already locked on Ellie like a predator circling its prey. She froze mid-step, near the drink station, a stack of side plates in her hand. "Did you seat them?" Bradley barked. The question wasn't really a question. It was a challenge. Ellie didn't shrink. Her shoulders straightened just enough. "Yes," she said. "They weren't doing anything wrong. They just asked for food." Bradley's laugh was cold and sharp. "You think this is a damn soup kitchen? Look at them." He turned toward the table, taking in Chuck's mud-stained boots and Keanu's faded jeans. His lip curled like he'd smelled something sour. They look like charity cases in work boots, he said loudly. What exactly made you think they belonged in my restaurant? Chuck sat still. His eyes didn't blink, didn't move. They were locked on Bradley like twin steel beams. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Keanu kept both hands flat on the table, fingers spread. One knuckle twitched slightly. That was the only sign of tension. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet. We came in peace. We were turned away at the door. She chose to show us decency. Bradley scoffed, loud enough that two nearby guests turned their heads. Decency, he repeated. This is Estelle and Roe. We don't give out pity meals. We serve people who fit the atmosphere. Ellie stepped forward. They weren't asking for pity, just a place to sit. And they've caused no trouble. Bradley turned to her, sharply. No trouble? The second they walked in, half the guests started whispering. You know what the Wentworths just told the hostess? They asked if they could be moved farther from the kitchen because the air smelled like burnt tires. Chuck's hand curled into a loose fist on his knee, still under the table. Keanu's eyes darkened just slightly. Ellie held her ground. That's not on them. That's on how people choose to see. Bradley took a step closer, his face inches from hers now. You want to be a philosopher, Ellie? Go write a book. Around here, I pay you to keep the floor looking like a place people want to spend money. You seating them? That cost us money. Ellie stayed still. They deserve to be treated like human beings. Bradley's voice dropped into a growl. You want to talk about what people deserve? Fine. Let's talk consequences. Bradley took a slow step back from Ellie, straightening his collar like he'd just completed a lecture. Then he pointed toward the swinging doors that led to the back of house. Since you're so eager to stand up for garbage, Ellie, you can spend the rest of the week where garbage belongs. She blinked, but didn't look away. You're on restroom duty. Every shift, top to bottom. Deep clean, he said, smirking now. And don't forget the staff loading dock. It's overdue for a mop. After that, you can polish silverware in the break room. Ellie's jaw trembled, but her voice stayed steady. Because I seated two hungry men? Bradley leaned in again, this time quieter, but meaner. Because you forgot your place. Keanu's hand tapped once against the table. Deliberate and slow. Chuck didn't blink. His eyes hadn't left Bradley, but Ellie was the one who broke the silence. If doing my job with dignity gets me demoted, then maybe you don't know what leadership island. Bradley chuckled, bitter and mocking. Dignity? You carry trays for tips, Ellie. Don't. Pretend like you're changing the world. She looked at him calmly. Number? But I can choose not to become like you. The air between them tensed. Electric. The restaurant had gone quiet again. No one nearby was speaking anymore. Everyone was listening while pretending not to. Bradley noticed. He straightened up, brushing the sleeve of his jacket and turning toward Chuck and Keanu like they were stains on white linen. I don't know what your angle is, he said, voice rising slightly now. You think just because someone let you in the back that you've got a right to sit here and act like you belong? Chuck's voice finally came. It was low, even, almost too calm. We didn't act like we belonged. We just asked to eat, Bradley scoffed. Sure. And next you'll be asking for a free steak and a selfie with the chef? Do you know how much these tables go for on a Saturday night? Keanu leaned forward now, resting his elbows gently on the table. I don't think you understand what this moment island. Bradley raised an eyebrow. Enlighten me. Keanu's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. This is the part people remember. Not the food, not the ambiance. The way you treated someone who didn't look like money. Bradley turned to Ellie. And you pack up your stuff. After your shift, I want your locker cleared. Consider this your final write-up. Ellie opened her mouth to reply, but Chuck cut in before she could. You're punishing her for doing what you should have done. Bradley's face twisted. I'm protecting this restaurant from people who think they can walk in off the street and demand to be treated like royalty. Keanu stood slowly. Not aggressive. Just present. No one here asked to be royalty, he said. Just human. Bradley turned toward Keanu, eyes narrowing. He didn't recognize the face in front of him, at least. Not yet. To him, Keanu was just another man in dirty jeans and a sweaty shirt. Just another problem. "You know what you are?" Bradley said, his voice dropping to a sneer. "You're a moment, an inconvenience, a speed bump in a night I need to run smoothly." Keanu didn't move. "You just told the truth about yourself, loud enough for everyone to hear it." A guest at a nearby table cleared his throat awkwardly. Another shifted uncomfortably in their seat. The silence was thick now, wrapped in tension. Bradley adjusted his cuffs. "You're lucky I don't call security." Chuck stood up slowly. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But something in the air shifted the moment he rose to his full height. Even the manager took a half step back before he caught himself. Chuck's voice came low and steady. "You want us gone? We'll go. But know this. You just punished the only decent person in this room." Ellie's breathing hitched. Her eyes were wide, but she said nothing. Bradley scoffed, laughing now. "You think this is some kind of moral play? You think people care about decency in a place like this? They come for status, not sermons." Keanu kept his eyes locked on the manager. "Then it's no longer a restaurant. It's a stage, and you're performing cruelty for applause." Bradley raised his hand dismissively. "You're not worth the linen you're sitting on." Chuck looked down at the table, then at the chair he'd just vacated. He ran a calloused hand across the edge of it, then turned back to Ellie. "You did good," he said. Ellie looked like she was fighting tears. I didn't want you to leave hungry." Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded bill. He handed it to her without a word. Not a tip, a thank you. Bradley saw it and scoffed again. "Save your scraps. She won't be working here long enough to cash them." Keanu looked over one last time. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a scalpel. "People like you think power is permanent, but it's rented. And the lease runs out the moment someone finally stands up." Bradley rolled his eyes. "Well, no one's standing." Chuck smiled faintly. "You're wrong about that." He stepped aside, letting Ellie pass first. She hesitated, then nodded and walked toward the kitchen. Chuck and Keanu followed behind her, side by side. No grand exit, no threats, just three people walking away from something broken. And behind them, Bradley stood frozen in the dining room, still smirking, still convinced he'd won. Still unaware of exactly who he'd just insulted, Chuck and Keanu returned to the table quietly. The walk back felt longer than it was. The eyes were heavier this time. Whispers buzzed low across linen-covered tables, like insects humming in the heat. No one said a word to their faces, but no one had to. They sat back down, water glasses still sweating on the table. Ellie returned a moment later with a small towel folded over her arm. She placed it down near Chuck without a word, then knelt beside the table to tighten the wobbling leg, her fingers moving fast and careful. "Sorry," she whispered, eyes focused on her work. "I didn't want it to get worse." Chuck looked down at her, then back out across the dining room. "You didn't make it worse," he said gently. "You just made it visible." She stood, dusted her apron, and turned to go. Moments later, a different server appeared. Male, tall, thin, with a polished smile that didn't reach his eyes. He carried a pitcher of water in one hand and a breadbasket in the other. "Refills?" he asked dryly. Before either man could respond, he tipped the pitcher just a little too far. A wave of cold water spilled directly into Chuck's lap. The splash soaked through denim and darkened the front of his jeans in an instant. The waiter blinked, then gave a mock gasp. "Oh," he said with no real emotion. "Clumsy me." Chuck didn't move. He exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. Water dripped from his fingers as he reached for a napkin. Keanu's eyes flicked up to the waiter. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The message was clear in the way he stared, long, steady, and unflinching. The server turned and walked away without apologizing. Ellie appeared seconds later with a dry towel. Her expression said, Everything. Chuck took it and pressed it to his lap. "No harm done," he said, even though everyone knew it wasn't true. But it didn't stop there. Another server came by with a starter plate. As she set it down, a spoon slipped from the tray handle first, straight into Keanu's dish. Sauce splattered across the table, a dot landing on his shirt. She didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She just picked up the spoon, wiped it on a napkin, and left without a word. Ellie returned again, this time with a damp cloth, gently blotting the corner of Keanu's shirt. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Keanu nodded, his eyes still on the exit the other server had taken. Across the room, a man muttered under his breath to his date, just loud enough to carry. "They smell like gas stations." She laughed behind her wine glass. "That one looks like he just got out of jail." Chuck's hand tensed on the table. Another woman clutched her purse and moved it to the far side of her chair as if expecting someone to snatch it and run. Keanu stayed still. His breathing was measured, eyes trained straight ahead. But there was a storm brewing behind them, one you could feel even if you couldn't hear it yet. Chuck wiped his hands on the towel Ellie had left. The ice water had already soaked through his jeans, but he didn't move to change position. He just sat there, like a man who had been through worse and knew how to endure. A young waiter passed by with a tray of wine glasses. As he walked past, he threw a quick glance over his shoulder, leaned toward a nearby table, and whispered something that made two guests giggle. Chuck heard it. Keanu heard it. Then came the sound that made the room pause for a second. A fork clinking against a plate. Then a snort of laughter, and a voice at the back of the room that said, "What are they doing here anyway?" "This ain't a soup line," Ellie returned again, quieter than before. She knelt by the table and began picking up the spoon from Keanu's plate with a cloth. Her hands were trembling now, just slightly. "I'll fix this," she said softly. "You shouldn't have to," Chuck replied. His voice was low but firm. "You're not the problem." Keanu's eyes scanned the room. Every gesture, every smirk, every shift of discomfort, it painted a picture, not just of judgment, but of permission. Like everyone had silently agreed to look down on them, because someone in power said it was okay. The tension thickened as another waiter, this one with a fake French accent and perfect posture, arrived at their table. He didn't smile, didn't even pretend to. He dropped 2 menus without a word. "Steak's out," he said. "So's the lobster. Probably best if you look toward the bottom half of the menu." Keanu looked up. "What do you recommend?" The waiter didn't miss a beat. "The house salad. It's clean, simple, won't stain anything." Chuck gave a low grunt. "We'll take 2. The waiter's smirk widened. "Figures." Then he walked away. The room filled again with low murmurs. Diners leaned into one another, hands cupping mouths, eyes darting toward Chuck and Keanu, then away like they were peeking at a car wreck and pretending not to care. A woman at a corner booth raised her phone and angled it toward the table. Keanu noticed. So did Chuck. Neither said a word. Behind the bar, someone laughed. It wasn't the laugh of amusement, it was the kind of laugh meant to poke, to escalate, to humiliate. And then, from the kitchen entrance near the wine rack, Bradley stepped back into view. This time, he wasn't walking. He was marching. And in his hand was a plate. Steam curled from it. Pasta spaghetti by the look of it, piled high with thick red sauce. Bradley's voice was sharp as glass. "I'm tired of this pity parade," he said. "This ain't a homeless shelter." And then, without a moment's pause, he raised the plate. The plate flew through the air like a weapon. Time didn't slow down, but for one breath, the room held still. Every conversation stopped. Every fork froze midair. Every eye turned, and then came the sound. The crash of ceramic against bone. The plate didn't just miss, it hit square. Spaghetti exploded against the side of Chuck's head. The force knocked him slightly sideways in his seat, noodles slapping his cheek, marinara spraying like shrapnel. The plate shattered against the wall behind him with a sickening crack. A long streak of red sauce ran down Chuck's jaw. For a moment, it wasn't clear where the pasta ended and the blood began. A thin line cut across his temple, sharp and dark, like someone had drawn a warning into his skin. He didn't flinch. He didn't move. He just reached up slowly, 2 fingers tracing the curve of his brow. He touched the blood gently, then looked down at his hand. The silence in the restaurant was deafening. Across the room, someone gasped. A wine glass tipped over. No one stood up. Keanu's chair scraped the tile as he rose. It was slow, controlled, but there was nothing casual about it. He took 1 step forward, then another, closing the space between him and Bradley like a shadow rising at sunset. Bradley didn't step back. He was still smirking, still drunk on the sound of his own performance. "Oh, what now?" he sneered. "You gonna cry, cowboy?" Chuck still hadn't moved. Keanu stood inches from Bradley now, his voice low and dangerous. The kind of calm that comes just before a storm breaks open. "You assaulted a man." Bradley rolled his eyes. "I threw a plate of food. Maybe next time you'll think twice about dirtying up my dining room." Keanu's jaw tensed. "That man is bleeding." "Good," Bradley snapped. "Maybe it'll teach him something about where he doesn't belong." Chuck wiped the blood from his eye, finally blinking as a drop landed on his shirt. Behind them, Ellie came running from the kitchen, eyes wide, napkins in hand. She fell to her knees beside Chuck, gently cupping the side of his face. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You're bleeding. Please, sir, don't move. I've got it. I'm so sorry. Just hold still." Chuck looked at her, not at Bradley. "You shouldn't be the one apologizing," he said softly. Ellie didn't answer. Her hands were trembling as she dabbed the wound, trying to stop the blood. Bradley took a step back, shaking his head. "Unbelievable. You're all acting like this is some sort of..." But he didn't finish, because Keanu stepped between them, and for the first time since the night began, something in Bradley's face changed. The smirk faded, and the first flicker of doubt settled behind his eyes. Keanu's voice was just above a whisper. "You don't know who we are." He paused. "But you're about to." For a full 10 seconds, no one in the restaurant moved. The laughter had stopped, the clinking of forks. Even the piano player had frozen mid-note, hands hovering above the keys like he didn't trust himself to play the wrong song for the wrong moment. Chuck sat perfectly still, blood mixing with marinara on the side of his face. His hand dropped to his lap, napkin crumpled and stained red. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look around. He didn't even look at Bradley. His eyes were distant, unfocused, like they were staring at something far worse than this moment. Keanu rose. Not fast, not with fury, but with purpose. His chair scraped loudly against the tile, sending a shiver through the silence. It was a sound that didn't belong in a place with crystal glasses and butter knives. Bradley stepped back instinctively, but tried to cover it by squaring his shoulders. "You want to play hero?" he sneered. "Go ahead, try something. I'll have you in handcuffs so fast you'll be back in the alley before dessert." Keanu didn't answer. He just walked forward, 1 step, then another. Bradley opened his mouth again, but it was too late. Keanu's hand shot out, gripped the collar of Bradley's vest, and shoved him hard against the edge of the bar. The wood clattered as Bradley's back hit it with a dull thud. A row of spoons behind the bar rattled from the impact. Gasps echoed across the room. Ellie rushed in from the kitchen, a stack of napkins in one hand and a bottle of water in the other. She dropped to her knees beside Chuck, panic flashing across her face. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Don't move. Please. You're bleeding." Chuck winced slightly but kept his voice calm. "It's all right," he said. "Don't worry about me. You need a doctor," Ellie whispered. "I've had worse," Chuck said, forcing a half smile. Behind them, Bradley was squirming under Keanu's grip. "Let go of me," he spat. "You're assaulting me. I'll call the cops. You hear me? I'll press charges." Keanu leaned in closer. His voice was ice. "Please, do." Bradley blinked, stunned. Keanu's face was still. His hands didn't shake. There was no rage in his expression, only clarity. Cold and calm, like someone who'd already decided what came next and wasn't afraid of it. I'm gonna call the police, Bradley hissed again. Good, Keanu said. Let's talk about what just happened to my friend. Bradley's mouth opened, but no words came out. Ellie kept pressing the napkins gently to Chuck's temple. Her hands were shaking. You should leave, she whispered, before it gets worse. Chuck looked at her, then at Keanu. It's not worth it, he said softly. Keanu looked down at Bradley, then released his grip. Bradley stumbled backward, panting, his shirt collar twisted and damp with sweat. Chuck rose to his feet, slow and steady. Let's go, he said. Keanu stepped back from Bradley without another word. His hands were by his sides again, open, steady. He didn't need to say anything else. The message had already landed. Bradley tugged at his collar, eyes darting around the room. Guests were still staring. Some had pulled out their phones but hadn't hit record yet, waiting to see if the scene would turn into something they could post. Others just sat in quiet, frozen unease. No one offered help. No one stood with them. Chuck turned to Ellie. Are you all right? He asked. She nodded, swallowing hard. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm fine. I didn't expect it to get this bad. Chuck gave her a look that was more kindness than smile. You did right. Don't ever regret that. Ellie stood up, holding the napkin soaked in blood and sauce. Her eyes were glassy. She opened her mouth, hesitated, then looked down at the ruined fabric in her hands. I should have stopped him, she said. You did, Keanu replied. The moment you brought us to that table, Bradley barked a short laugh. You think any of this matters? You're nothing. You'll be gone in 5 minutes, and this place will go back to serving real guests. Chuck turned toward him, calm and collected. Your kind of guest, he said. Polished shoes and hollow hearts. Bradley's jaw tensed. Get out before I call security. Keanu was already moving toward the back. He didn't break stride. Chuck walked beside him, one hand pressed to his temple where the blood still pulsed slowly. Ellie followed, clutching the soiled napkins to her chest like a shield. They passed through the narrow corridor between the kitchen and the exit. Servers froze in place as they moved past. No one spoke. No one offered a nod. The silence said everything. At the back door, Keanu paused. Ellie stood behind them, unsure. I'm going with you, she said. Chuck looked at her, his expression softening. You don't have to. I do, she said. Because if I stay now, after all that, I'm no better than them. Keanu opened the door and held it for her. Outside, the night air was cool and sharp. The back alley was lit by a single overhead bulb that flickered every few seconds. A trash bin sat to the side, its lid half open, the smell faint but present. Chuck exhaled and looked up at the sky. Smells better out here anyway. Ellie stood just outside the door, hands shaking. I'm going to lose my job, she said. Keanu turned to her. You already won something more important. Ellie blinked. Like what? Chuck answered before Keanu could. Your voice. Behind them, the door clicked shut. They didn't look back. They stood in the alley for a moment longer, letting the chill in the air wash away the heat of what had just happened. Ellie glanced back once more at the door. She could still hear the muffled clatter of dishes, the low hum of conversations resuming as if nothing had occurred. It stung, but she didn't let it stop her. Chuck took off his jacket and gently draped it over her shoulders. You're braver than you think, he said. She smiled weakly, tugging the sleeves closer. I never expected kindness from the people I was told to fear. Keanu leaned against the wall, hands in his pockets. His voice was low and even. Sometimes the dirtiest hands do the cleanest work. Ellie looked between the two of them. Who are you guys, really? Chuck chuckled. Just two guys with mud on our boots and a habit of showing up where we're not welcome. Keanu nodded. And hearts that don't sit still when they see wrong. A car rolled by at the end of the alley, headlights flashing momentarily across their faces before vanishing into the night. A breeze picked up, stirring wrappers near the trash bin. Ellie shivered. Chuck looked at her gently. Where do you go from here? She hesitated. I don't know. I moved here last year. My dad passed. I needed work. This place, It wasn't great, but it paid rent. Keanu looked thoughtful. You've got more dignity than the entire front half of that restaurant. She laughed softly, almost surprised at herself. I don't even have a backup plan. Chuck pulled a crumpled business card from his back pocket. It was wrinkled and spotted with dirt. He handed it to her. We run a community garage in Westlake. Fix bikes, help vets, feed folks on the weekends. It's not fancy, but you'd be around people who know what Kindness Island. Ellie stared at the card. You'd really take me on, Keanu answered without pause. Only if you don't mind engine grease, street music, and people who hug too much. Ellie smiled for the first time that night, really smiled. It reached her eyes. I'd like that, she said. Chuck tilted his head. Then come by tomorrow. We've got a busted wheelchair ramp that needs fixing. Your first assignment. Playfully, yes, sir. They all shared a quiet laugh. As they began walking toward the street, Ellie fell into step between the two men, no longer trailing, no longer small, and somewhere deep in that alley, behind a door that had slammed with cruelty, something beautiful had already begun to bloom. Not from revenge, but from dignity, from kindness, from the quiet power of standing up without ever having to raise your voice. Ellie's old sedan coughed like it had asthma as it came to life. The engine rattled, and one of the doors had to be held shut with a fraying bungee cord. But it ran, and that was all that mattered. Chuck grumbled as Keanu guided him into the back seat. I'm fine, Chuck muttered. It's just a scratch. Keanu glanced at the dried spaghetti on Chuck's shirt and the slow trickle of blood that had hardened near his temple. You're bleeding, and your eye is swelling shut. You need a doctor. Chuck shook his head, but he didn't push Keanu away. Doctors cost money. Keanu leaned in closer. You're not paying a dime. Just let someone look at you. Ellie jumped into the driver's seat, glanced at them through the rearview mirror, and threw the car into gear. The ER's 5 minutes away. No arguments. Chuck crossed his arms, but didn't say another word. The ride was bumpy, and every pothole seemed to find them. Ellie muttered apologies every time the tires hit a dip. Keanu noticed her hands. They were calloused, chipped nails, the fingers tense on the wheel, but she drove with care. He could tell she was used to protecting people. At a red light, she glanced back. You doing okay back there? Chuck just grunted. Keanu gave a nod. We're fine. You sure you want to do this? Ellie replied softly. No one else would. They pulled into the ER parking lot, where the harsh glow of fluorescent lights lit up the cracked asphalt. Ellie parked near the entrance and jumped out. She opened the back door and offered Chuck her arm. He stared at her, then down at her hand. You shouldn't have to do this. She smiled. Neither should you. He sighed and let her help him up. Inside, the front desk nurse didn't even blink when Chuck walked in, holding a bloodied towel to his head. He looked like every other beat-up man that came through the ER on a Friday night. Ellie answered the intake questions while Keanu stayed beside Chuck, filling in gaps when needed. When they asked about insurance, Ellie was quick to answer. He's a friend, she said. He'll pay cash. Just treat him. They took him in right away. Ellie stayed behind with Keanu in the waiting room, watching as the sliding doors closed behind Chuck and the nurse wheeled him away. She finally exhaled and sat down hard in one of the plastic chairs. Keanu sat beside her, elbows on his knees, watching her closely. You didn't have to do all this, he said quietly. Ellie didn't look at him. She stared straight ahead at the glowing vending machine across the room. Someone once helped my dad, she said. He wouldn't still be here if they hadn't. I can't forget that. Then he said, tell me about your dad. Ellie leaned back in her chair, the harsh hospital lights making the circles under her eyes more visible. My dad was a mechanic his whole life, owned a little shop 2 blocks from where we lived. Not fancy, just honest work. One day he collapsed on the job. Stroke. I was 17. Keanu listened without interrupting. They told us he'd never walk again, said he'd need round-the-clock care, and we couldn't afford it. I had plans back then. Culinary school, traveling, all that big dream stuff. But dreams don't pay hospital bills. Her voice didn't crack, but her jaw tightened. I dropped everything. Started working wherever I could. Diners, bakeries, food trucks, cleaning offices. Anything to keep him home, to keep him comfortable. Keanu's eyes softened. That's a lot for one person. Ellie shrugged. Sometimes I think I'm holding everything together with chewing gum and duct tape. But I still show up. She looked over at him, then added, kind of like you did tonight. Keanu gave a half smile. I've been on the other side of pain. I recognized the look. Ellie glanced down at her apron, still stained from the restaurant chaos. You'd think people would be kinder, especially with what the world's been through lately. But kindness feels like an endangered species. They both sat in silence for a while. The television on the wall buzzed with muted sports highlights. A toddler cried somewhere in the back. Keanu eventually asked, "What about your dream?" Ellie blinked. "Which one?" "The food truck. You mentioned it." She hesitated. "I've got recipes written on napkins, menus scribbled in notebooks. I even saved up for a used truck last year, but then Dad had a relapse. Hospital stay wiped my savings clean." Keanu leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "If you could cook anything right now, no rules, no limits, what would it be?" Her face brightened, just a little. Grilled peach and goat cheese panini with a balsamic glaze, side of rosemary sweet potato fries, and a lemon thyme lemonade. He chuckled. "That's specific. It's the signature dish, the one I'd put my name on. You have a name for the truck?" She nodded, almost shyly. "Second serving. Because everyone deserves another shot at food, at life, at dignity." Keanu let that sit for a moment. Then he said softly, "That's a beautiful name." Ellie's smile faded as she glanced at the triage door. "I just wish life gave me a second serving too." Before Keanu could respond, a nurse stepped out holding a clipboard. "Mr. Norris is asking for you both." Ellie stood up quickly. Keanu followed. As they walked down the hallway toward Chuck's room, Ellie whispered, "You think he'll be okay?" Keanu didn't hesitate. "Chuck's made of iron and wildfire. He'll be fine." Ellie smiled for the first time since they left the restaurant. Chuck sat on the edge of the hospital bed, shirt off, white bandage wrapped above his left eyebrow. There was a dried streak of blood still clinging to his cheek, but he looked more annoyed than hurt. "You two planning to just leave me here for dead?" he grumbled. Keanu raised a brow. "You look like you were enjoying the attention." Ellie laughed quietly, her eyes lighting up. "You've got a hard head. That plate barely left a scratch," Chuck grunted. "Tell that to my dignity." Keanu crossed the room and handed Chuck a bottle of water from the small fridge. "Drink this before you argue with any more dinnerware." Chuck took it, muttering, "That spaghetti had it coming." Ellie pulled up a chair beside him, eyeing the monitor quietly beeping next to his bed. "Your blood pressure's high. Stress?" Chuck shook his head. "People." He looked between them, his voice softening. "I don't like hospitals. Brings back too many memories. Combat medics, body bags. You get the picture." Ellie gave him a respectful nod. "I get it." There was a pause. Then Chuck looked at her with more warmth in his eyes than before. "You didn't have to do what you did tonight." Ellie lowered her gaze. "I couldn't just stand there. You stood up to a man twice your size, in front of a whole room of cowards. You've got heart, Ellie. Don't let him kill it." She swallowed, clearly fighting back tears. Keanu stepped beside her. "He's right. That kind of courage doesn't come from training. It comes from character." Chuck nodded slowly. "People like you working 2 jobs, caring for family, still finding space for kindness, you're rare. And rare things should be protected." Ellie tried to laugh it off. "Well, if you two ever need a waitress with good reflexes and bad timing, I'm your girl." Chuck smirked. "You're more than that." Keanu glanced at his watch. It was after midnight. "We should get out of here before they start charging for the air." Chuck looked down at the discharge papers. "I signed them already. Doctor said I can go. No concussion. Just a slice." Ellie picked up his shirt from the chair and handed it to him. "I'll drive," she said. "I'm not letting you two hobble into the night on foot again." Chuck raised an eyebrow. "What makes you think we're done walking?" Keanu grinned. Because we're not. They stepped out into the cool night air, the city quiet, the parking lot nearly empty. Ellie helped Chuck into the back seat of her car and then slid into the driver's seat. Keanu sat beside her, thoughtful. As the engine turned over, Ellie looked at them and said, "So, where to?" Keanu answered, without missing a beat, "Back to the beginning." Ellie blinked. "You mean the restaurant?" Chuck leaned forward. "Not yet. There's something we need to do first." Ellie glanced at the rearview mirror, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. "Then hang on," she said with a smile, "because this ride's not over." The motel room was dim, lit only by the soft amber glow of a dusty lamp in the corner. Outside, crickets chirped, and a distant truck engine roared past on the highway. Inside, silence stretched between the two men. Keanu sat at the small wooden desk, his laptop open, screen glowing against his tired face. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then he typed. Chuck sat across from him on the foot of the bed, one arm resting on a pillow, his bandaged head leaning slightly against the wall. He stared at the ceiling for a moment, then reached for his phone. "You sure about this?" Keanu asked quietly, not looking up. Chuck didn't answer immediately. He was already scrolling through his contacts. Then he tapped one. The name on the screen read RC. He pressed call. Keanu kept typing. Legal terminology scrolled across the screen. Draft contracts, buyout options, terms and conditions. He wasn't just writing words, he was orchestrating a silent takeover. Chuck put the phone to his ear. After 2 rings, someone picked up. A clipped, British voice answered. "Crown Ridge Capital. Who may I ask is—" Chuck cut in. "Tell Graham the ghost is back." There was a pause. Then, a quiet click. A few seconds later, another voice came on. Calm, older, but sharp as glass. "Well, I'll be damned. I thought you were dead." Chuck smirked. "Still kicking, Graham. Still pissed." The man on the other end chuckled. "What do you need?" Chuck's tone shifted. "I want to buy controlling shares in a hospitality group called Horizon Dining Ventures. Fast, quiet. Use my old shell account." Keanu glanced over. "Use the alias." Chuck nodded, then returned to the call. "Make it under Roan Carter." "Any reason?" Graham asked. Chuck looked toward Keanu. "Let's just say justice wears boots." Keanu's lips twitched, but he didn't smile. He was focused, drawing up the LLC formation papers under a separate holding entity. He double-checked. Everything addresses, blind trust names, non-disclosure clauses. They weren't just retaliating. They were planning a clean, quiet coup. Chuck ended the call. "He'll have the paperwork routed through Cayman and back by morning. Roan Carter will hold 51% by noon tomorrow." Keanu nodded. "That gives us access to internal board documents. We can start cleaning house before anyone realizes who's holding the broom." Chuck leaned forward, cracking his knuckles. "You ever think you'd use your Matrix money to buy out a restaurant chain?" Keanu leaned back, cracked his neck. "I thought I'd use it to build a dojo. Life had other plans." They were quiet for a moment. Chuck looked toward the window, watching the wind rustle the curtains. "This ain't about payback," he said. "It's about setting things right." Keanu closed the laptop. "I know." Outside, the night deepened. Inside, 2 men with battle scars and worn-out boots plotted something not for glory, but for dignity. Not revenge, but repair. And no one would see it coming. The next morning came without fanfare. Sunlight spilled across the dusty floorboards of the motel room. Keanu was already awake, dressed in jeans and a plain black t-shirt, sipping black coffee from a paper cup. Chuck emerged from the bathroom, rubbing a towel across his face. The bandage on his temple had shifted, revealing a bruise that had darkened overnight. "You sleep?" Keanu asked. "Like a soldier on guard duty," Chuck muttered. Keanu passed him a second cup of coffee. Chuck took it with a grunt of thanks. On the desk sat a folder printed documents, signature lines flagged with sticky notes, and a laptop screen still showing the buyout portal. Crown Ridge had moved fast. Graham had wired the funds through a series of shell accounts overnight. The holding company, RCK Holdings, now owned 51.7% of Horizon Dining Ventures. Keanu picked up the pen and signed. Chuck sat down next to him and scrawled his alias, Roan Carter, on the dotted line. "That's it," Keanu said. "It's done." A long silence followed. They looked at each other, the weight of what they'd done settling between them. It wasn't about the money. It never was. It was about power, silent, righteous power that didn't need to be loud to be permanent. Chuck pulled out his phone again. He opened the Horizon Dining Ventures website. "Bradley's not just a manager," he said, scrolling through the staff directory. "He's regional operations lead, oversees 6 restaurants in the state." Keanu studied the page over his shoulder. "Which means if we pull the thread, the rest of the fabric might tear." Chuck smirked. "I don't mind tearing fabric." Keanu clicked back to the employee org chart. "What about the location's owner?" "Daryl Owens," Chuck replied. "Mid-50s, Florida-based investor, mostly hands-off, likes to put bootstrappers in charge." Keanu nodded. "Then we show him what happens when the boots are steel-toed." Chuck leaned back, arms crossed. "I want Bradley gone, but not humiliated, fired, silenced. Let him crawl back to whatever corner he came from." "And Ellie?" Keanu asked quietly. Chuck didn't hesitate. "She stays. She runs the joint if she wants. Or we buy her that truck she dreamed about." Keanu stood and stretched. "Let's not tell her yet. I want her to feel like she earned it, not like we handed her charity." Chuck nodded slowly. "She's got fight, but she's also got dreams. It's rare to find both in one person." Keanu smiled faintly. "Reminds me of someone I used to be." Chuck looked over at him. "You still are, just richer." Keanu gave a dry chuckle. "We'll see how rich I feel when we're scrubbing grease off menus and trying to stop food trucks from exploding." Chuck downed the rest of his coffee in one long pull. "So, what's the next move?" Keanu picked up the folder and slipped it into his backpack. "We go back." Chuck raised an eyebrow. "Back?" Keanu's voice didn't waver. "To where it all started." The ride back into town was quiet. Chuck drove this time. The old truck's engine rumbled low, steady, like a sleeping beast. Keanu rode with the folder on his lap, his fingers tracing its edges like it held more than just documents. Maybe it held justice, or maybe just closure. As they pulled past the city limits sign, Keanu broke the silence. "You ever think we'd do something like this?" Chuck kept his eyes on the road. "Never crossed my mind, not once." Keanu nodded. "Same." They passed a gas station. Chuck slowed briefly at a stoplight. An elderly man was wiping down the front windows of a small taco stand. Life kept moving. No one knew what was coming. "I used to think fixing things meant punching someone," Chuck said, glancing sideways. "Now I'm learning. Sometimes you fix things with a pen." Keanu smiled faintly. "We'll still need a punch or two by the end of this. Let's not get too soft." Chuck grinned. "Deal." They parked at a small cafe down the street from the restaurant. Not the same place. A quiet one. No valet. No starched tablecloths. Just coffee, pancakes, and people who knew what real work was. They sat outside, sipping dark roast from mismatched mugs. Keanu pulled out his phone and sent one message. 2. Graham Montrose subject. Initiate Phase 2. Keep identities sealed. Prepare Ellie's documentation. A single reply came back. Understood. Quiet storm protocol engaged. Chuck watched the sidewalk, his gaze locked on a mother walking her toddler in circles near the bakery window. "You know what the old me would have done?" Keanu sipped his coffee. "Go on." "I would have thrown that manager through a window and walked away thinking I won. But it wouldn't have changed a thing. Ellie would still be scrubbing toilets. Bradley would still be making women cry behind the kitchen door." Keanu nodded. Sometimes walking away is strength, but sometimes walking back is stronger. Chuck leaned back, staring at the sky. "It's strange. I thought I came to this town for a film gig. Instead, I found a reason to stay up at night thinking about someone else's future." "Maybe that's the gig," Keanu said. "Maybe this is the role." Chuck looked at him. "What role?" Keanu shrugged. "The quiet fixer, the invisible hand. The guy who shows up, shakes the ground, and leaves without applause." Chuck raised his mug like a toast. "To the guy nobody claps for." Keanu tapped his mug to Chuck's. "Exactly." As they sat in silence again, the morning sun warmed their faces. People passed without knowing who they were. That was the point. In the shadows of power, they were moving mountains. The documents were signed. The funds were transferred. The chain of command would soon collapse from the top down, and when it did, Ellie would be standing right where she belonged. The sun hadn't even risen when Ellie got the call. It wasn't from a manager. It wasn't even from a human resources department. It was from a nameless voice she didn't recognize, a monotone woman from corporate who said, without emotion, that Ellie was no longer employed by Crestmont Hospitality Group. No warning. No explanation beyond the word insubordination. When Ellie asked for details, the voice repeated the word like it was policy carved in stone. She sat on the edge of her bed for several minutes after the call ended, phone still in hand, eyes unfocused. Her father stirred in the next room, coughing weakly. Ellie slipped into her slippers and shuffled into the kitchenette, starting the kettle. Her muscles moved out of habit. 2 sugars, 1 cream for Dad. She held the cup steady as she walked in, set it on the small folding table next to his bed, and kissed his forehead. "You're up. Early," he rasped. "Yeah," she said softly. "Just wanted to get ahead of the day." She didn't tell him she'd been fired. Not yet. She tried not to cry while he smiled and sipped his tea, still half asleep. After breakfast and his medication, she got dressed in her interview clothes, same black slacks, same light blue blouse. She kept ironed and hung just for moments like this. Even without a job, she couldn't afford to stop moving. She printed off 3 fresh resumes at the library on 5th Street. 2 of the restaurant managers she visited were kind, but uninterested. One woman at a small cafe in Midtown glanced at Ellie's resume, then her name tag from the old job still clipped to her purse strap, and her smile vanished. "We're not hiring right now," the woman said, although the sign in the window said they were. Ellie nodded, thanked her, and left. By the 4th place, her voice started to crack between words. She noticed things, little things. The way one manager's eyes flicked to a note scribbled on her file before his tone changed. The awkward silences. The questions that never came. Back at home, she checked her email. A rejection letter was already waiting. It included a strange line at the bottom. Reference check revealed patterns of conflict with prior management. Best of luck. Ellie's hands trembled. She clicked through 3 more emails, all the same. She had been blacklisted. Her name was poison in an industry where gossip traveled faster than food orders. She sat down on the linoleum floor in her tiny kitchen and let the tears come, one by one, until her body gave in completely. Her back slid down the wall, her knees curled up. She buried her face in her arms and wept. It wasn't just about the job. It was about the years she'd spent holding everything together. The way she'd swallowed her pride, smiled through mistreatment, showed up early and stayed late. It was about being disposable. And now, discarded. She pulled herself up eventually, wiped her eyes, and checked on her father again. He was napping, his chest rising slowly under the thin quilt. "Still got you," she whispered. But her voice no longer had the same strength. The next few days blurred together like overexposed film. Ellie woke up early, dressed in clean clothes, and went out searching. She handed out resumes at places she once dreamed of working. Artisan bakeries, food trucks, upscale brunch cafes. But none of them took her seriously. Some didn't even look up when she entered. One place, a small bistro in South Pasadena, seemed promising. The manager there was friendly. He even asked about her favorite dishes to cook. Ellie's eyes lit up as she described her recipe for Chipotle shrimp tacos with pineapple slaw. For the first time in days, she sounded alive. But then he asked where she'd worked before. She hesitated. When she finally answered, he nodded slowly, his expression dimming. "I'm sorry," he said. "It's just, we've heard things." Ellie nodded. She didn't ask what. She just thanked him and left. Back at the apartment building, she took the stairs instead of the elevator. The air felt heavier than usual, the narrow stairwell lit only by a flickering bulb on the second landing. The paint was chipped, and the scent of bleach and mildew lingered in the concrete. She made it to the third floor before her legs gave out. She sat on the step. Her breath came in shallow pulls, not from physical exhaustion but emotional depletion. She pulled out her phone. No calls. No texts. No new emails. The silence was louder than any insult she'd ever heard. She gripped the phone, like it might somehow anchor her, but it didn't. Nothing did. Her thoughts spiraled. She'd worked double shifts to pay for her father's medicine. She gave up on dating, on vacations, on any sense of youth. She'd put in the work. She showed up when no one else did. She kept her head down. She smiled when she should have screamed. And still, it wasn't enough. Her paycheck hadn't even arrived. She emailed HR twice and got no response. By Friday, the apartment manager slid a notice under her door. Rent was due in 5 days. She hadn't even paid the last month in full. Her father didn't know any of it. He kept asking if she was still working the dinner shift. She kept saying yes. She couldn't bring herself to tell him the truth, not when he already blamed himself for being a burden. He still wore the same threadbare robe, still waited for her to bring him tea in the mornings, still smiled when she walked into the room. He didn't deserve more weight on his shoulders. So, Ellie carried it all. Every ounce of despair, every unpaid bill, every fake smile. At night, when the world went quiet, she sat by the small window near her bed, staring out at the alley below. Rats scurried past overflowing dumpsters. Somewhere in the distance, a car alarm wailed. She pressed her forehead to the glass and whispered to no one in particular, "I don't know how much more I can take." But the night gave no answers, only silence. And yet, every morning, she still rose. She still brewed the tea. She still kissed her father's forehead. Because that was the part of her no one could blacklist. Her heart, her grit, her quiet, aching perseverance. Chuck sat at the motel room desk with a cup of black coffee steaming in his hand. The room smelled faintly of cheap disinfectant and cinnamon from Ellie's forgotten muffin box on the table. Keanu was hunched over the laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard, pulling up contact lists and public records. "You sure about this guy?" Keanu asked, glancing over. Chuck nodded. "Javier Trent, retired LAPD, knows how to dig without leaving footprints." Keanu hit send on the message. 3 hours later, Javier knocked on their door. He looked nothing like a detective. He wore jeans and a wrinkled flannel shirt, his salt and pepper hair pulled into a loose ponytail, but his eyes were razor sharp. He listened more than he spoke. When Chuck filled him in, minus their real names, Javier raised one eyebrow and said, "You want dirt on a restaurant chain?" "Not just dirt," Chuck said. "We want the whole damn garden." They handed him everything they had. The name of the parent company, the restaurant location, dates, times, Ellie's firing, Chuck's head injury, even Bradley's last name, which Keanu had overheard when the waitress whispered it during the chaos. Javier jotted it all down. "Give me 72 hours, he said, "and keep your heads down." The next few days felt like waiting for a storm. Chuck sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, flipping through old contacts. Some were dead. Some were retired. But a few still owed him favors. He called in one from a man at Crown Ridge Capital, a quiet ally in the world of finance. Keanu stayed focused on building a paper trail. He tracked the restaurant's ownership tree and noticed something strange. There were dozens of LLCs, all leading back to a single umbrella corporation called Avalon Hospitality Group. They were registered offshore. "They're hiding something," Keanu said. Chuck nodded. "That's why we're gonna shine a damn spotlight." On the third day, Javier returned with a folder so thick it looked like a phone book. He dropped it on the table and said, "Buckle up." They opened it together. The first few pages listed internal emails leaked by a former HR assistant who now worked as a barista in Reseda. She'd saved everything. The emails showed Bradley's tendency to fudge termination paperwork, changing the reasons listed from retaliation to no call divided by no show. Then came a list of pay stubs that didn't match reported hours. Over 50 employees across multiple locations had been shorted on their overtime, tips, or base pay. Some of them were still working there. Most had left with nothing. "I got statements from a few," Javier said. "They're scared, but they remember Ellie. Said she was one of the only decent ones." Then he flipped to the next section, surveillance footage. He slid over a USB stick. Footage from that night. They tried to delete it, but I pulled it from a backup server using a dummy access code. Keanu plugged it into the laptop. The screen lit up with a time-stamped black and white video. They watched the moment the bottle hit Chuck's head, the manager's smug smirk, the other employees looking away, Ellie rushing in with napkins, Keanu standing up, grabbing Bradley by the collar. It wasn't just blurry chaos. It was evidence. Javier looked between them. "You boys were right to call me, but I gotta ask, what's the plan?" Chuck's jaw tightened. "This ain't just about us anymore." Chuck slid the surveillance footage back into the envelope and looked up at Javier. "This doesn't stay buried," he said. "People like Ellie, they don't have the power to fight this, but we do." Keanu closed the laptop and stood. "We need a strategy, not just justice, real change." Javier leaned back in his chair. "You could go to the press, or better yet, class action. With this much documentation, you'll get lawyers lining up to take it pro bono." Keanu shook his head. "That's not how we want this to play out. Not yet." Chuck agreed. "Too messy and too slow." They paced the motel floor as they laid out a different approach, quiet, precise, undeniable. Keanu would build the legal framework for a takeover. Chuck would prepare the case for investor fraud and liability. And Javier would keep digging, looking for more former employees, more skeletons, more receipts. Javier left with a handshake and a promise to stay in the shadows. By the next day, more employees had come forward. One was a dishwasher named Sal who worked doubles 6 days a week and was told not to clock in until his shift was halfway over. Another was a bartender named Lacey who'd been forced to cover the night Bradley assaulted Chuck. She admitted she'd wanted to speak out, but was offered a $500 bonus to keep quiet and keep pouring. Keanu took careful notes. Each story fueled the fire. Then a woman named Rosa showed up at the motel with a baby on her hip. She looked exhausted, her eyes red from crying. She had worked with Ellie until a year ago. She said her wages were withheld for weeks and that her medical insurance was quietly canceled after she got pregnant. She offered them a folder of her own, a collection of emails, schedules, and a formal complaint she had submitted to HR that mysteriously disappeared. Keanu asked, "Why bring this to us now?" She looked down at her baby. "Because Ellie was kind to me when no one else was. She gave me extra soup when I didn't eat. She bought me baby clothes from a thrift store. And now she's in trouble. I can feel it." Chuck swallowed hard. "She's not alone anymore." By the end of the week, their evidence file had tripled in size. They had forged termination letters, split payment reports, 2 fake HR aliases traced back to Bradley's own email, and photos of bruises one server had taken after being grabbed by a manager. It was more than enough. And still, Chuck wasn't smiling, because he knew what had to come next. "This ain't just a lawsuit," he told Keanu. "It's an exorcism. We're pulling the poison out by the root." Keanu nodded. "And we're not doing it for revenge." Chuck looked at the names on the witness list. The old faces, the new ones, the scared ones. "We're doing it so they can walk in with their heads up again." The ballroom at the Harrington Grand Hotel sparkled like a polished gem. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in golden light, bouncing off the silver-rimmed dinnerware and immaculate white tablecloths. Waitstaff in tuxedos moved like shadows, filling champagne flutes and adjusting place settings with quiet precision. Tonight was supposed to be a victory lap. Bradley Sutton had gone all out, a company-wide appreciation banquet, a tribute to excellence in hospitality, a night to honor the managers, regional directors, and select kitchen and floor staff from across his restaurant empire. He stood near the stage, shaking hands and beaming with smug confidence. His tailored navy suit hugged his frame just right, and his smile didn't waver as photographers clicked away. Flanked by his legal assistant and two of his favorite franchise owners, Bradley looked like a man who believed he had won the game. Meanwhile, in the far corner of the ballroom, two men stepped through the back doors and paused. Keanu Reeves, clean-shaven and dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, scanned the crowd with quiet calculation. Beside him, Chuck wore a deep gray jacket over a pressed black shirt, his posture straight, his steps steady. The room didn't notice them at first. They didn't arrive with fanfare or entourage. No name tags, no grand introduction. Just two men walking slowly toward an empty table near the wall. The press didn't recognize them immediately, but whispers started the moment Keanu sat down. A few curious glances turned into puzzled stares. Wait, is that? No way, it can't be. Isn't that Chuck Romano? Why is Keanu Reeves at a restaurant banquet? Bradley remained oblivious. He was too busy basking in his own spotlight. A group of young marketing associates clinked glasses nearby, laughing at one of his jokes. A regional director leaned in for a selfie. When the master of ceremonies took the stage, the music dimmed and the clinking of silverware paused. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," the MC said with a practiced grin. "Tonight we gather to celebrate what makes the Crown Ridge Group not just a company, but a family. And none of that would be possible without the man who had the vision, the drive, and the courage to build it." A drumroll echoed from the speakers. "Please welcome Mr. Bradley Sutton." Thunderous applause filled the room as Bradley strode to the podium, soaking it all in like a seasoned performer hitting his mark. He adjusted the microphone and smiled wide. "Thank you," he said, with both hands raised. "Thank you. This is what success looks like." In the back corner, Keanu sipped water. Chuck folded his hands in his lap, eyes locked on the stage. Bradley launched into his speech, half motivational, half self-congratulatory. He thanked the team, praised his executives, told an exaggerated story about starting with just one diner and a dream. He even got misty-eyed, describing the loyalty of his staff. And then, just as he was about to close, the ballroom doors opened again. This time, the room turned in unison, because what happened next would change everything. The doors parted, and in walked Ellie. She wasn't dressed in kitchen whites or faded jeans tonight. She wore a simple black dress, modest but elegant, and her hair, usually pulled back in a tight ponytail, framed her face in soft waves. She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She walked down the aisle like it was her final stand. A low murmur rippled through the ballroom. Some employees recognized her immediately. Others whispered questions. But all eyes were now bouncing between Ellie and the two quiet men seated near the back. Bradley's smile faltered. He tried to laugh it off, tapping the mic. "Well, looks like someone crashed the party." Ellie reached the foot of the stage, but didn't say a word. She turned slightly toward the audience, not toward him, and stopped. The master of ceremonies, confused, leaned into the microphone again. Everything okay?" That's when Keanu stood up. The cameras followed him as he slowly walked forward, calm, steady, his face unreadable. He joined Ellie at the front of the room, then turned to face the crowd. "I'd like to say a few words," he said quietly. There was a pause. The MC looked to Bradley, who hesitated. But by now, too many eyes were watching, too many phones recording. To shut it down would raise more eyebrows than letting it happen. Bradley nodded, stiffly. Keanu stepped up to the podium and adjusted the mic. "Most of you don't know me. That's by design. I've been traveling under another name for the past month, observing, listening." A gasp from someone in the crowd. Chuck stood up in the back and slowly walked forward, his limp more pronounced under the ballroom lighting, but his expression was calm. He joined Keanu and Ellie, creating a triangle of presence that no one dared interrupt. Keanu continued, "This is Chuck Romano. You may recognize him as the man who founded this restaurant chain. Years ago, he was pushed out of his own company, sidelined by decisions that prioritize profit over people." Bradley took a sharp breath. "And this," Keanu gestured gently to Ellie, "is the woman who stood up when no one else did. She was mocked, humiliated, and fired for showing basic human decency. Her paycheck was withheld. Her references were falsified. But she still checked in on her father, still held her head high. Ellie's jaw trembled slightly, but she didn't cry. Not tonight. Over the past few weeks, Keanu went on, we've uncovered forged HR records, stolen wages, abusive management tactics, and a culture of fear. A wave of unease passed through the crowd. And as of this morning, Chuck added, his voice gravelly but strong, we own controlling interest in the Crown Ridge Hospitality Group. Dead silence. Not a fork moved, not a glass clinked. Even the music in the background had gone silent. Keanu turned toward Bradley, his tone never rising. You can leave quietly, or stay and watch what dignity really looks like. Either way, your time's up. Bradley's smile was gone. So was the color in his face. And the trap had closed. For a long moment, no one moved. The ballroom seemed suspended in time. Then the master of ceremonies cleared his throat and stepped back up to the microphone. His voice shook slightly, but he managed to regain composure. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, we have a special announcement this evening. As of this morning, there's been a change in ownership. He paused, glanced nervously toward the side of the stage, where Bradley stood frozen, then pressed on. Please welcome our new majority stakeholders, Chuck Norris and Keanu Reeves. A collective gasp spread through the room like wildfire. Cameras flashed from every angle. Reporters who had come expecting a bland corporate banquet scrambled to aim their phones. Forks clattered to plates. Bradley's face drained of color, and his jaw slackened. He looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. Keanu took the mic again, his calm presence anchoring the moment. We didn't come here for applause, he began. We came because people like Ellie deserve better. He gestured gently to her. Ellie stood at the base of the stage, still silent, still dignified, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She hadn't known this was coming. Not like this. But she didn't back away. Chuck stepped up beside Keanu. His posture was firm, chest out, eyes steady. The years hadn't softened him, but they had clarified what mattered. You know, Chuck said, voice gravelly with age but rich with fire. You build something with your bare hands, and then you watch it get twisted by people with no skin in the game. It doesn't sit right, but it took getting thrown out like garbage to really see how far this thing had fallen. The crowd was riveted. No one looked at their plates anymore. Keanu nodded. We worked under false names, got ignored, mocked, lied to. And that was the best thing that could have happened. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. Because sometimes you have to be treated like trash, he continued, to see what the system really island. Chuck took a step forward, scanning the room. Let me be clear. This isn't a revenge tour. It's a wake-up call. If you've been working hard, treating people right, your job is safe. In fact, your future just got a whole lot brighter. Ellie finally stepped forward. Keanu reached down and helped her onto the stage. She looked out over the sea of faces, co-workers, supervisors, customers, and corporate staff. People who once laughed behind her back. Others who turned away. A few who looked at her now with something like shame in their eyes. My name is Ellie Navarro, she said softly but clearly. I was fired 2 weeks ago for refusing to lie. I was told I didn't belong, that I was just a waitress with an attitude problem. She looked toward Keanu and Chuck, then back at the crowd. But I stood my ground, and I'd do it again. Silence fell again, but this time, it was a silence of reflection, of reckoning. Ellie stepped back, and Keanu placed a hand gently on her shoulder. Chuck leaned into the mic once more. The days of silence are over. It's time to clean house. Bradley finally stepped forward. His smile had vanished. He glanced around for support but saw only avoidance co-workers looking down, senior managers whispering. his assistant slowly backing into the crowd. He tried to steady his voice. "This is a joke, right? Some kind of publicity stunt? These men, they don't understand how our company works." Chuck interrupted, eyes narrowed. "We understand enough to know your books are cooked." Gasps again. A ripple moved through the room. Keanu added, "Your HR files contain forged signatures. You've withheld wages, lied about shift coverage, falsified disciplinary actions to silence complaints." Bradley's hands trembled as he reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out his phone. "This is a hostile takeover. I'm calling the board." Chuck shook his head. "We are the board now." Bradley blinked. Then his expression twisted into disbelief, then panic. "You can't just... This isn't... I built this company." "No," Keanu said softly. "You inherited it, then hollowed it out." Bradley looked around again. The room wasn't with him. The staff, once eager to flatter, now stood still. A few whispered, a few crossed their arms, but most watched in a kind of stunned silence, waiting to see what would happen next. Chuck gestured toward the back of the ballroom. A set of double doors opened, and a tall woman in a black suit entered. She carried a folder and moved with quiet authority. "This is our attorney," Chuck said. "Everything's already signed. Ownership transferred. Federal filings done. You're free to dispute it, just not on this stage." Keanu turned back to the crowd. "This is your moment too," he said. "To speak up. We've heard your stories through anonymous tips, through brave voices like Ellie's. We've seen the footage." He gestured to a projector screen being wheeled in. The lights dimmed. For the next few minutes, silence returned, but this time, it was filled with images. Grainy security camera footage played on the screen. Staff being yelled at, schedules changed without notice, an elderly dishwasher slipping and being ignored. A clip showed Ellie being dismissed mid-shift, standing stunned at the service door while Bradley walked by, laughing into his phone. There were gasps. One woman near the front wiped her eyes. A man in the back clenched his jaw and looked at his shoes. When the lights came back up, Keanu stepped forward again. "This is what we're here to change. No more pretending. No more silence." Chuck nodded beside him. "But we can't do it without you." And then, slowly, something shifted. A hand went up in the middle of the room, then another, then someone clapped. It was the beginning of a shift, not just in ownership, but in culture. Bradley stepped down quietly, flanked by security. No one stopped him. No one followed. But when Ellie stepped forward again and simply said, "Thank you," the applause that followed wasn't just polite. It was real, long, earnest. The banquet had started as a celebration of corporate spin. But by the time it ended, it had become something else entirely, a turning point. The final frame of the footage lingered on the screen. Ellie, standing alone at the back entrance, holding her apron, her shoulders stiff with humiliation. A slow fade to black. No music, no dramatic effect, just silence. Then, the house lights returned. Faces across the ballroom reflected raw emotion, confusion, anger, shame. A few whispered to each other, trying to make sense of what they'd just seen. A woman near the catering table dabbed her eyes with a napkin. A junior manager gripped the back of his chair with white knuckles. Bradley still stood near the stage, frozen, his jaw clenched. His eyes shifted rapidly, like he was looking for a script he no longer had. Keanu moved forward again, slowly, quietly. He carried a plain manila folder. Inside it, the end of an era. He stopped just a foot in front of Bradley. There was no triumph in his expression, no smugness, just clarity. Keanu held out the folder. "These are your termination papers," he said, calmly, effective immediately. Bradley didn't take it. Chuck stepped up beside Keanu. His voice cut through the stillness. "You are permanently barred from holding any managerial position under our ownership. This company will no longer be a playground for your ego." Still, Bradley didn't speak. He glanced toward the side exit, where the security detail now waited. Keanu placed the folder gently on a podium beside him. "And just so we're clear," he added, "the footage you just saw, along with internal emails, signed statements, and video from multiple witnesses, has already been submitted to the legal authorities." There was a murmur in the room. Staff exchanged glances. One woman let out a small gasp. Someone clapped just once, but it was enough to signal the mood was shifting. Bradley's face turned a pale shade of red. "You can't do this," he whispered, loud enough for the mic to pick up. "You think the board will stand for this?" Chuck stepped in again, eyes narrowed. "You are the board's embarrassment. But we're fixing that now." From the side of the ballroom, a figure stepped forward, an HR compliance officer from the private firm Keanu had brought in 2 weeks earlier. She nodded at Chuck, then approached Bradley with quiet professionalism. "Mr. Jennings," she said, "you are being formally escorted from this event. You may collect your personal belongings under supervision tomorrow morning. Until then, you are not permitted access to any company, property, or systems." Bradley looked around again, but no one moved to defend him. Keanu took a breath. "This isn't revenge," he said to the room. "It's restoration." He turned to the staff seated throughout the ballroom. "For years, you've had to swallow your dignity. You've been told to work harder, smile more, accept less. But that ends today. We're starting over. Not because we want a headline, but because you deserve better." A young man near the back stood up. "You mean he's really out?" Chuck nodded. "Gone. For good." The relief that washed through the room was palpable. Shoulders relaxed. Some even smiled. For the first time in years, the fear was leaving. But the next part would matter even more. As Bradley was led away in silence, escorted by security through a side corridor, no one followed, no one protested. And perhaps that said more than any words could. Chuck took the mic once again, his posture firm but open. "We didn't just come here to clean house," he said. "We came to rebuild it." There was an audible shift in the air, anticipation now replacing tension. Keanu stepped forward again, this time holding a new folder, which he opened on the podium. The pages inside weren't legal documents, they were letters, reports, testimonials. "I want to read something," Keanu began. His voice was steady, but there was emotion in it. "This is from a former line cook who worked here for 12 years. He was let go after requesting time off to take care of his sick mother. No warnings, no compassion, just a cold termination. His name was Mateo." He paused, then read aloud. "For years, I gave my nights, weekends, and holidays to this place. I missed birthdays, weddings, funerals. When my mother got sick, I asked for a week. They gave me a pink slip. I thought I wasn't worth more than a shift." Keanu looked up. "Mateo now owns a food truck. And last week he served our crew lunch while we were preparing this takeover. He smiled when he saw me. He said, 'Thanks for remembering us.'" There was a quiet swell of emotion around the room. Many had similar stories. Some were those faces in the video. Some hadn't dared to speak until now. Chuck gestured toward the screen behind him. A new slide appeared. "Restoration plan, effective immediately. We're rolling out a company-wide audit," Chuck explained. "Back pay will be reviewed and corrected. Harassment reports will be reopened. Anonymous channels will be expanded. And there will be real consequences for anyone who abuses their position." Keanu nodded. "But that's just policy. The heart of this place needs more than policy. It needs trust, so we're starting with people." He motioned to a woman standing by the stage doors. Ellie. She stepped into the ballroom slowly, wearing a simple black blouse, her hair pulled back neatly. She looked stunned, unsure. "Ellie was fired for showing decency," Keanu said. "She refused to mistreat someone, so she lost her job." Ellie's eyes welled with tears as he turned to her. "You didn't deserve what happened to you," he continued, "and you certainly don't deserve to be forgotten. If you're willing, we'd like you to return." There was a long pause. Ellie nodded slowly, her lip trembling. Then, applause broke out. It wasn't polite or forced, it was full, loud, and real. A woman in HR stood and clapped. A janitor near the wall pumped his fist in the air. Someone shouted, "Welcome back." Keanu smiled as Ellie covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Chuck leaned into the mic one more time. "This is your company now," he said. "Not his, not ours, yours." And for the first time in far too long, the people in that ballroom believed it. 3 days after the banquet, Ellie received an email with a subject line so simple it almost felt like a mistake. It read, "We'd like to speak with you. CRH. No formal signature, no explanation, just an address and a time." The address was Crown Ridge HQ, the main tower downtown, the very place she'd passed by so many times without ever imagining she'd step foot inside. She almost didn't go. For a few hours, she sat at her kitchen table in her little one-bedroom apartment, turning the message over in her mind. Was this a setup? A final cruel joke? Or maybe they wanted her to apologize for causing trouble at the banquet. But something about the simplicity of the note made her wonder. And eventually, curiosity outweighed fear. She ironed her best blouse, tied her hair in a neat low ponytail, and took the bus into the city. The sun was sharp that morning. The tower gleamed like steel ambition. She swallowed hard as she entered the revolving doors. Inside, the lobby was all glass and light. A woman at the front desk greeted her with a warm smile. "Miss Ellie Martinez?" Ellie nodded hesitantly. "They're expecting you. Floor 34. She was given a key card and pointed toward a private elevator. As the doors closed, Ellie felt her heart pounding in her chest. The ride was silent, except for the hum of movement and the rise of numbers glowing on the screen above her. Ding! The doors opened to a quiet, modern office space that smelled faintly of eucalyptus and fresh paper. Waiting just ahead were 2 men in suits, Keanu Reeves and Chuck Norris. They stood with easy posture, no entourage, no press, just them. Ellie froze. Chuck stepped forward with a small smile. "Ellie, thank you for coming." She took a hesitant step out of the elevator, hands clasped in front of her. I didn't know what this was about. We didn't want to overwhelm you," Keanu said gently. "But there's something important we'd like to offer." They gestured toward a glass conference room to the left. The table inside was empty, except for a single folder. Ellie followed them inside. Still unsure if she was dreaming, Chuck pulled out a chair for her, and Keanu sat across from her. They didn't open laptops. No one took notes. There was only the quiet tension of something big about to happen. Keanu leaned forward slightly. "You stood up when no one else did," he said. "And we saw that, not just at the banquet, in the footage, in the interviews. You didn't scream, you didn't fight, but you didn't bend either." Chuck nodded. "That kind of integrity is rare, and it's exactly what this company needs if it's going to change." Keanu opened the folder and slid it across the table to her. Inside was a job offer. Director of Human-Centered Training and Ethics. Full benefits. 6-figure salary. Oversight of hiring policy and new leadership development. Complete independence from corporate influence. Ellie's mouth parted slightly as she read. Her fingers trembled against the paper. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't understand. I didn't do anything special." Keanu looked at her with a calm seriousness. "You didn't need to. That's the point." Chuck leaned forward, elbows resting on the polished table. "Everyone saw what Bradley did, but you showed who we need to become. You treated people like people. You asked the right questions, and you made others feel like they weren't invisible." Ellie's eyes welled up, but she tried to hold it together. The folder sat open in front of her, like something from another world. A job offer she'd never imagined. A title she never asked for. And yet, it felt like something true. Like someone finally saw her. "I was just trying to help someone who looked tired," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "And I got written up for it." Chuck smiled gently. "Exactly." There was a long pause. Not uncomfortable, just honest. Keanu stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city for a moment, before turning back to her. "This company has talent. It has power, but it lost its heart a long time ago. We want you to help bring that back." Ellie blinked rapidly. "You want me To train the people who used to ignore me? Keanu's smile was small but steady. Yes, because we trust that you won't use that power the way they did. Chuck added, "You're not here for revenge. You're here for reform." Ellie looked down again at the offer letter. The salary was more than she'd ever dreamed of. The role sounded like something designed for someone who had gone to Ivy League schools and had decades of management experience. Not someone like her, a former front desk receptionist with a drawer full of ignored complaints and apology cards from colleagues who never spoke up. "I don't even know where to begin," she whispered. "That's why we're giving you the team you need," Keanu replied. "You won't be alone," Chuck added. "We've already terminated most of the toxic leadership. What we need now is someone who understands people, someone who listens." Tears slipped down Ellie's cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. "I thought I'd be unemployed forever after what happened," she said. "I thought speaking up would ruin my life. But it saved others," Keanu said gently. "And now it's your turn to build something better." Silence again, but this time it was filled with something strong, something whole. Ellie closed the folder slowly and pressed her hand on top of it. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll do it." Chuck smiled wide. Keanu nodded once with deep respect. Ellie stood up. Her shoulders were still trembling, but her chin lifted just slightly. For the first time in years, she felt like she had stepped into something that belonged to her. Not because of power or privilege, but because of truth. As they walked her to the elevator, Chuck clapped a hand gently on her back. "We'll see you Monday, Director Martinez." The elevator doors closed behind her, and Ellie smiled. Monday morning came with quiet determination. Ellie Martinez stepped through the doors of Crown Ridge headquarters, not as a receptionist, not as a forgotten voice, but as Director of Human-Centered Training and Ethics. She wore a simple navy blazer, black slacks, and no jewelry except a small silver bracelet her late grandmother had given her years ago. She didn't walk with arrogance. She didn't speak with superiority, but her presence turned heads, not because she demanded it, because she carried the weight of someone who had survived the fire and come out forged. The HR team, still shaken by recent changes, greeted her with unsure smiles. Some avoided eye contact. Others watched her, curious. But Ellie didn't waste time. Her first meeting wasn't in the executive boardroom. It was in the break room. She gathered every floor-level worker, the custodians, assistants, clerks, baristas, and yes, the receptionists. She introduced herself, not with a speech, but with questions. "What's the hardest part of your job no one ever asks about?" One by one, people began to speak, quiet at first, then louder. Their answers filled a whiteboard in less than 20 minutes. She listened and she wrote. By lunch, she had already started redesigning the company's outdated training manuals, not from theory, from lived experience, from voices that had been ignored too long. Her second meeting was with the regional managers. She handed each one a printed case study, anonymized accounts of abuse and silence from former employees. "I'm not here to blame," she told them. "I'm here to end the pattern." A few of the old guard looked uncomfortable. One even tried to challenge her with corporate jargon. Ellie didn't raise her voice. She simply read aloud an excerpt from one of the testimonials. It was from a dishwasher in Dallas who had been screamed at daily for working too slowly while recovering from surgery. He was later fired for attitude. The manager who terminated him had received a bonus. Silence. "I want you to imagine," Ellie said softly, "if that had been your father or your child." No one argued after that. Behind the scenes, Keanu and Chuck watched the early days of her work unfold from a respectful distance. They didn't call press conferences. They didn't insert themselves into her efforts. They approved every budget she submitted. They made sure her office had everything she needed, from legal advisors to a tech team to a small film crew documenting the training reform for internal transparency. Chuck even had a mural commissioned outside the staff entrance. It showed a group of workers standing together under one phrase: seen, heard, valued. Ellie cried when she saw it. By the third week, she had flown to 3 cities. In Chicago, she met with longtime servers who broke down in tears, just knowing someone finally cared about their tipping structure. In Atlanta, she sat with a team of cooks during a midnight shift, asking what systems broke down during peak hours. In Portland, she gave a talk about dignity in labor to a packed hotel ballroom of hospitality workers. Her ideas were clear, real, implementable, and they were spreading. By month's end, Ellie's reforms were no longer confined to conference rooms or training slides. They were becoming policy. She dismantled the unfair pooled tipping model that had allowed certain managers to skim from server gratuities. Instead, she introduced a transparent digital system that logged tips in real time. No middlemen, no confusion. And she didn't stop there. She created an anonymous reporting line directly routed to her office. No HR filtering, no risk of retaliation. If a dishwasher in Miami felt bullied, or a hostess in Seattle felt unsafe, they could speak up and they'd be heard. The calls poured in. Some came with shaking voices. Others arrived as handwritten letters. She read every single one. When she walked through a dining room or a hotel corridor now, employees nodded with something rare in corporate America trust. Keanu once stood beside her in a break room after she'd finished reviewing backlogs of complaint reports. He handed her a coffee and said, "No one should ever have to whisper to be believed." Ellie just nodded. She didn't cry often anymore. Not because she wasn't moved, but because she'd channeled the pain into purpose. Chuck Norris, usually a man of few words, publicly praised her work at a regional summit in Denver. He stood at the back of the stage, hands folded, and said simply, "Ellie's not a reformer. She's a reminder of what this place was always supposed to be." The press caught wind of it. An article on a major news site appeared with the headline, "The Waitress Who Rewrote the Rules." Underneath was a photo of Ellie in a modest dress, standing in front of a training diagram, surrounded by young employees taking notes. No glamour, no spotlight, just substance. Another outlet called her a quiet revolution in heels and compassion. And still, Ellie didn't let it go to her head. She replied to emails from night staff at 2 a.m. She flew coach even when offered business class. She told every new hire during orientation, "If you're ever afraid to speak up, come find me. My door doesn't close." What made her leadership powerful wasn't that she knew all the answers, it was that she was willing to ask better questions. How do we protect kindness? What does safety really look like? Why did it take so long for dignity to matter? Crown Ridge's stock quietly rose. Employee retention surged. Customer reviews improved. But none of those were Ellie's goals. Her goal was simple. No one should ever go home feeling less human because of where they work. One night, after a long training day in Los Angeles, she got a message from an older woman who had been a server for 38 years. It read, "You made me feel seen, and I didn't think that was possible anymore." Ellie stared at that message in the dark. Then she looked out the hotel window at the distant city lights and whispered, "Thank you." The system hadn't just been reset, it had been humanized. And at the center of it all stood a woman who once poured coffee, wiped tables, and got yelled at for speaking the truth. Now, she poured light into a broken structure, and others followed. The evening air outside Crown Ridge's newest flagship location was crisp, laced with the scent of fresh bread from a nearby bakery and the distant sound of a saxophone playing on the sidewalk. The restaurant had just closed for the night, and Ellie stepped out through the side door, her shoulders heavy with exhaustion, but the good kind. The kind that came from a day well spent, decisions well made, and people treated right. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and took a deep breath. Then she saw it. Across the parking lot, parked near the back, under a streetlight, was a dusty old pickup truck, and sitting casually on the tailgate, legs dangling, were two unmistakable figures. Chuck Norris lifted a sandwich wrapped in foil and gave her a grin. Keanu Reeves raised his water bottle in greeting. Ellie blinked in disbelief, then laughed softly and made her way over. "You two waiting for valet?" she teased, stopping beside them. Chuck patted the tailgate beside him. "Thought we'd give this place another shot. Heard the new director's doing things differently." Ellie smiled and took the offered seat. The tailgate creaked beneath her as she sat between them. They unwrapped their sandwiches in silence for a few moments. The kind of silence that feels full, not empty. "So," Chuck said, glancing toward the glowing windows of the restaurant. "How's it going?" Ellie chewed thoughtfully before answering. "Busy. Overwhelming sometimes. But good. The staff is amazing. They really care. It's like they just needed permission to be human again." Keanu nodded slowly. "Sometimes that's all it takes." Chuck took a bite of his sandwich, wiped his hands, and leaned back on his elbows. "I walked through the kitchen earlier. Kid named Darnell told me he's never had a boss ask him how his day was going. Said he thought he'd get fired just for talking too much. But you talked to him for 10 minutes. Ellie shrugged. He was nervous. But he's brilliant. He designed a new system for dish rotation that saves water and time. Keanu smiled. "And you listened. That's the job, right?" Ellie said, almost too casually. Chuck gave her a look. "Number. That's leadership." The streetlight above them flickered, then steadied. A car drove by, bass rumbling in the distance. Ellie looked up at the stars. "You know, some nights I still wonder if this is real. If I'm going to wake up and be back in that old cafe, trying to stretch tips to buy gas." "You earned every piece of this." Ellie turned to him. "But what if I hadn't spoken up? What if I'd stayed quiet like I was supposed to?" Chuck reached into the cooler behind them, pulled out a bottle of root beer, and popped it open. "Then Bradley would still be running things, and we'd still be pretending not to notice." They were quiet again, this time a bit more somber. Ellie took a slow sip of water. "Do people really change? I mean, for good?" Keanu didn't answer right away. He looked out toward the restaurant, where 2 dishwashers were laughing as they left for the night. Then he turned back to Ellie. "Some don't," he said. "But you did. And now others will too." Ellie stared at the street for a while, watching the lights flicker in the puddles left from the afternoon rain. The distant hum of traffic felt softer than usual. Even the night seemed to be listening. She looked back at Keanu. "You really think this matters? The manuals, the training videos, the changes to the tip system? Will it stick?" Keanu tilted his head slightly. "You changed a culture, not a policy." Chuck leaned forward. "And culture? That doesn't change with commands. It changes with people. With example. With someone saying no more and meaning it." Ellie shook her head gently. "But it was just one little act, one conversation, one check I refused to process." Chuck raised an eyebrow. "That one act reached us. That one act ended a man's abusive career. That one act opened a door for every server who thought they had to stay silent." Keanu leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "The cameras didn't catch your courage, but the people did." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Ellie smiled. It wasn't a smile of pride. It was a quiet, humbled kind of smile. The kind that came from someone who finally saw the ripples of what they once thought was a pebble. "I saw an article," she said, "in some small blog. It was titled, 'The Waitress Who Rewrote the Rules.' I laughed out loud. I'm not a rule writer." Chuck chuckled. "You're rewriting more than rules. You're rewriting futures." Keanu pulled something from his jacket pocket. A folded piece of paper. He handed it to Ellie. She opened it slowly. Inside was a printed message. A letter from a restaurant manager in Iowa. It read, "Dear Ellie, I've watched your training videos, and I've implemented your dignity-first approach in all 5 of our stores. Our staff turnover dropped 40%. I used to think kindness was a liability in business. You proved me wrong. Thank you." Ellie's eyes watered. "I don't know this man," she whispered. "But he knows you," Keanu said softly. "That's legacy." Chuck stood, stretching his back with a slight groan. "Well, I suppose it's time to go." Ellie looked up. "You're leaving town?" "Not forever," Chuck replied. "Just long enough to stay out of your way." Keanu grinned. "This is your show now. We just gave you the stage." As they made their way to the driver's side, Ellie followed behind. Before Keanu stepped into the passenger seat, he paused. "Ellie," he said gently, "don't ever forget how this started." She waited. "It started when you refused to betray someone's dignity." He stepped into the truck. Chuck started the engine. "You're The kind of person we'd follow into fire. Just promise us one thing. Ellie leaned closer. What's that? Don't ever trade your heart for a title. The truck pulled away into the night. Ellie stood there for a while, clutching the letter. Inside her, something settled. Not pride, not power, but peace. Because sometimes, the smallest voice, in the right moment, could rewrite everything. And in that moment, Ellie knew she hadn't just survived. She had changed the game. The image of a pristine restaurant floor fades in gleaming tiles, polished to a shine. A waiter sweeps a corner, unaware of what had once stained that space. Then the memory flows backward. A bowl of spaghetti rewinds midair, sauce recoiling from the wall, back into a white ceramic bowl, still warm. Plates reassemble, chairs straighten. Laughter replays in reverse, back to silence. The entire night folds inward, and there, standing alone, is Ellie. Not Director Ellie, not the face of reform. Just a waitress with trembling hands, a pounding heart, and the courage to say, number. The world didn't notice her at first. No headlines, no applause. No one cheered when she denied the final request of a powerful manager. No spotlight followed her home. She walked through rain that night, invisible, uncertain, but not broken. That single moment, that quiet refusal to harm another human being, was the first stone dropped into still water. A ripple that reached boardrooms, training rooms, and newspaper columns. The truth is, dignity rarely enters with a marching band. It slips in through side doors, wearing old shoes, asking for nothing but fairness. Ellie didn't act to be remembered. She acted so someone else wouldn't be forgotten. We often think empires are toppled by force, by dramatic exposés, loud protests, viral takedowns. But sometimes, they fall because one person in an apron decides to keep her soul. There's no statue for that, no medal, just the quiet knowledge that something sacred remained untouched. And yet from that seed, a forest grew. Training manuals now carry her language. Respect first, tip second. Listen always. Managers across the country revise schedules and hold eye contact when staff speak. Secret shoppers now evaluate not only cleanliness, but kindness. The industry began to bend not because of policy, but because of pressure from a single soft voice that refused to echo cruelty. Ellie's legacy isn't just in systems. It's in the hands she reached when no one else did. It's in the apology letters staff now receive from upper management when they're mistreated. It's in the confidence of the new girl in the apron who knows she won't be alone. And still, Ellie walks quietly. She doesn't correct reporters when they misquote her. She doesn't ask for credit when restaurant numbers rise. She simply keeps doing what she did that night, standing up for someone else. Somewhere, someone's watching this and wondering if it's worth it, is worth risking your job, your peace, your comfort, just to do the right thing. This story is your answer. You don't need to be famous, or rich, or in charge. You just need to say, that's enough. When the line is crossed, even in silence, you have the right to draw it back. The world may polish its floors, make everything shine, but it's the dirt people walk in with the courage, the pain, the unseen burdens that tells the real story. That night, Ellie didn't clean the floor. She cleaned the conscience of a company, and it changed everything. Now we see her again, Ellie walking through that same corridor, not in a uniform, but in a tailored coat, a pass badge on her neck. Staff nod as she passes, not out of duty, but respect. She stops to speak to a dishwasher, asks how his mother is doing. She listens when he answers. She remembers names. She remembers birthdays. She remembers what it felt like not to be remembered. That's why she changed. Everything. Her office has no door. She says walls are for people who are afraid. Her desk is simple. Her drawer still holds that apology note she never gave Bradley. Not out of resentment, but as a reminder of where the pain stopped. With her, she didn't pass it on. Ellie is not a savior. She says that often. She just had a moment. And in that moment, she did not blink. The company never asked her to erase what happened. They let the record stand. Chuck, Keanu, they both knew the truth. matters more than reputation. There's something rare in that. Too many people try to clean the mirror instead of the face, but not them. They stood behind her. They didn't show up with PR teams. They came to her new office with sandwiches in hand. They sat on cardboard boxes before the furniture arrived. They asked her what she needed, and then they gave it quietly, fully, no conditions. And they told her one thing: don't let this become a symbol. Let it become a system. So she did. Ellie now oversees ethics across the franchise. She reviews complaints with a team she handpicked. Every training starts with a story real, lived, flawed. She teaches managers how to speak without condescension, how to apologize without defensiveness, how to lead without fear. The restaurant industry didn't know it needed her, but it did. Just like this world needs people like you. Yes, you watching from a phone, a laptop, maybe with tired eyes and a broken heart. Maybe someone just hurt you today. Maybe you bit your tongue instead of speaking up. Maybe you're still carrying the regret. It's not too late. The next moment can be different. You don't need a stage, or power, or an audience. You just need one thing: presence. Presence to witness, presence to care, presence to act when someone else cannot. You may not get applause. You may not even get thanks. But someone, somewhere, will feel safe again because of you. And if that's not worth it, what is? Before we end, let us ask you this. Have you ever stood up for someone when no one else did? Or has someone ever helped you quietly when you felt invisible? Share that moment in the comments. Let's fill this space with stories of invisible courage, unseen kindness, and the small acts that changed lives. This isn't just an incredible story. It's a map for others to follow, so they know they're not alone. If you believe dignity still matters, if you believe kindness still counts, if you believe the smallest voice can still echo across an empire, then comment below. And don't forget to subscribe, because this is just the beginning, and your story might be the next one we tell.